Chapter 1. The HOA President's Reign. In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek, Karen Thompson had established herself as the most formidable force on the Homeowners Association board. Her perfectly highlighted blonde hair and designer workout clothes became a familiar sight as she patrolled the streets, clipboard in hand, searching for any infraction against the HOA's lengthy rulebook. To her neighbors, particularly those with special needs or disabilities, Karen represented everything wrong with unchecked authority in residential communities. The narrator, whose name we'll learn later, lived with their sister Sarah in a modest home that had recently undergone significant changes. 6 months prior, Sarah's life took a dramatic turn when a vehicle accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. Despite this life-altering event, Sarah maintained her position as the state governor, a fact they kept hidden from their neighbors to preserve some semblance of normalcy during her recovery. Karen's particular obsession became the wheelchair ramp installed at Sarah's home. Following every regulation, obtaining proper permits, and using approved materials hadn't satisfied the HOA president's insatiable need for control. Each morning brought new violation notices taped to their front door, each one more absurd than the last. The narrator would crumple these notices and add them to a growing collection, their frustration mounting with each passing day. What made Karen's behavior particularly insidious was her calculated timing. She scheduled HOA meetings about the ramp precisely when Sarah couldn't attend due to her demanding schedule as governor. This pattern of harassment extended beyond mere inconvenience. It represented a systematic attempt to wear down their resistance through bureaucratic warfare. The narrator observed Karen's early morning surveillance missions, watching as she measured the ramp with a tape measure at dawn, claiming it was part of her duty as HOA president. Their kitchen window had become an unwanted vantage point into Karen's world of petty tyranny. The narrator would often catch glimpses of her standing in her driveway, phone in hand, photographing their property. Her carefully maintained appearance couldn't mask the genuine animosity etched into her features whenever she looked at the ramp. It wasn't just about maintaining property values or aesthetic standards. This was personal. As the conflict escalated, the narrator began documenting everything. They recorded interactions, saved notices, and meticulously noted each encounter with Karen. Something deep in their gut warned that this situation might spiral out of control. Their instincts proved correct when they spotted Karen conferring with 2 men in suits near her house, gesturing dramatically toward their ramp while one took notes and the other snapped photographs. The tension in their household grew palpable. Sarah, despite her fatigue from juggling gubernatorial duties and physical therapy, maintained her characteristic optimism. Her dark circles spoke volumes about her exhaustion, yet she never complained. Not about her work, not about the accident that changed her life, and certainly not about Karen's relentless campaign against their home modifications. This resilience only seemed to fuel Karen's determination to remove the ramp, setting the stage for what would become the biggest mistake of her HOA career. Chapter 2. The Morning of Destruction. The sun had barely begun its ascent when the ground-shaking rumble of heavy machinery shattered the tranquility of our suburban street. My spoon clattered against my cereal bowl as I rushed to the window, heart pounding with dread. There, in our front yard, stood Karen in her signature red blazer, her perfectly styled hair catching the morning light. Beside her loomed a massive yellow bulldozer, its metal blade glinting menacingly in the early sunlight. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling as I activated the video function. 2 workers in orange vests were already measuring the ramp with bright yellow tape measures, their movements efficient and practiced. Karen clutched a stack of papers to her chest like precious documents, her face split by that familiar fake smile she reserved for HOA meetings. "Good, you're home," she chirped, striding toward me in heels that sank slightly into our freshly mowed grass. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice betraying more shake than I intended. Karen's smile widened, if possible, becoming even more artificial. "I have here an emergency order from the HOA board," she announced triumphantly, waving a document in my face but pulling it back before I could examine it. "This structure is in direct violation of community guidelines, Section 4.23. I took a deep breath, remembering Sarah's coaching during her campaign speeches. Karen, we submitted all necessary paperwork. We have city approval. I started, but she cut me off with a dismissive wave. The city isn't the HOA, dear, she said sweetly, her expression never faltering. And as president of the board, it's my duty to maintain our community standards. This eyesore is bringing down property values. Just look how it clashes with our neighborhood aesthetic. The bulldozer revved its engine, and my stomach dropped. I pulled up the property maps on my phone. Documents Sarah had insisted I save, showing our property boundaries and permits. This is illegal, I stated firmly. You can't demolish someone's property without proper notification or a court order. Karen's laughter was high-pitched and grating. Notification was issued 3 weeks ago via certified mail, she declared, producing another document bearing a signature I didn't recognize. My fingers flew across my phone, trying to reach Sarah. Of course, she was in a closed-door budget meeting today. I tried her assistant, her security team, anyone I could think of, but all lines went straight to voicemail. The construction crew began placing orange cones around our driveway. One worker seemed uncertain, repeatedly checking his paperwork and whispering to his colleague, pointing at something that clearly troubled him. If you do this, I warned, my voice gaining strength, you'll be hearing from our lawyers. This violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. I started live streaming everything on my phone, ensuring to capture every detail. For a brief moment, Karen's practiced smile slipped, but she quickly recovered. The HOA is exempt from federal law, she declared loudly enough that lights began flickering on in nearby houses. Our elderly neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, poked his head out his front door, then disappeared back inside upon seeing Karen. But she had already turned her attention to the bulldozer operator, giving him a sharp nod. The machine roared to life, its treads crunching on our driveway. I watched in horror as the blade descended toward the ramp that had taken us weeks to perfect. Last chance, Karen, I said, my phone steady in my hands despite my racing heart. You're making a terrible mistake. She turned back to me, her eyes cold despite her painted-on smile. The only mistake was allowing this monstrosity to be built in the first place, she sneered. Sometimes people need to learn that rules exist for a reason. The bulldozer's blade touched the edge of the ramp with a sickening screech of metal on concrete. Pieces of our meticulously designed ramp began to crumble under the assault. What Karen failed to notice was that Mr. Rodriguez had returned with his own camera, and more neighbors were gathering, phones raised and recording. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah's head of security. Stay calm. Keep recording. Help is 3 minutes out. For the first time that morning I smiled. Karen continued directing the destruction of our ramp like a conductor leading an orchestra, completely oblivious to the black SUVs turning onto our street or the distant wail of approaching sirens. Sometimes, the greatest mistakes stem from the smallest gaps in information, like not realizing your seemingly ordinary neighbor is actually one of the most powerful people in the state. And Karen was about to learn this lesson the hard way. Chapter 3. The Governor's Arrival. The transformation of our peaceful suburban street into a scene reminiscent of a political thriller unfolded with breathtaking speed. As Karen was busy exchanging congratulatory gestures with her HOA cronies over their apparent victory, the first black SUV rounded the corner, followed immediately by another, and then another. Red and blue lights began flashing everywhere, painting our neighborhood in an otherworldly glow. My hands trembled as I pressed record on my phone, knowing this moment would define our struggle. Karen's face shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion as 3 state police cruisers pulled up, followed by 5 identical black government vehicles. Our neighbors, who had been peeking through their blinds since the commotion began, now spilled onto their front lawns. An electric anticipation filled the air as everyone sensed something monumental was about to happen. What is all this? Karen demanded, her usually commanding voice cracking slightly. This is a private neighborhood matter. That's when Sarah's lead security detail emerged from the center SUV, surveying the area with practiced precision before opening the back door. A profound silence fell over the street as my sister rolled out in her wheelchair, wearing her official governor's blazer and displaying the same stern expression that had commanded respect during countless press conferences. "Indeed, Mrs. Thompson." Sarah's voice rang out clear and strong, cutting through the morning air. "This became a state matter the moment you violated federal disability protection laws." She wheeled forward, her security team moving in perfect formation around her. "Not to mention destroying state property without authorization," she added, her tone leaving no room for argument. Karen's face cycled through 5 different emotions in as many seconds. "State property?" she squeaked, visibly struggling to process the implications. "Yes," Sarah continued, pulling out her phone. "Would you like to see the deed? Or perhaps we should discuss the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm very familiar with Title II, having just signed new state safeguards last month." The crowd of neighbors had grown significantly, and I noticed at least a dozen phones recording everything. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street was already live on Facebook. "But the HOA bylaws clearly state," Karen began, backing away while clutching her precious violation notices. "Interesting you should mention those," Sarah interrupted, motioning to her aide who stepped forward with a thick binder. "My legal team has been reviewing your HOA's bylaws all afternoon. Would you like to know what we found?" I watched as Karen's fellow HOA board members began discreetly distancing themselves from her. "Multiple violations of state housing legislation," Sarah announced, pausing for effect. "Discriminatory practices. And," she hesitated dramatically, "irregular financial records going back 3 years. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled crowd. I zoomed in on Karen's face, capturing every nuance of shock and fear as it drained of color, becoming paler than the violation notices she so cherished. "This isn't. I didn't know," Karen stammered, but Sarah finished her sentence. "That I was the governor. Or that bulldozing a disabled person's access ramp without proper notice or permissions constitutes a federal offense." 2 state investigators stepped forward, notepads in hand, as news vans began arriving at the end of our street. "Mrs. Thompson," one investigator said formally, "we'll need you to come with us to answer some questions about today's events and these financial discrepancies." As Karen was led away, still muttering about property valuations and HOA bylaws, Sarah turned to address the gathered audience. Surrounded by the rubble of our ramp, she embodied leadership even while seated in her wheelchair. "My fellow neighbors," she began, her voice carrying the weight of authority tempered with compassion, "we now have an opportunity to discuss what community truly means." She gestured to the destroyed ramp. "This isn't just about me or my access to my home. This is about every person's right to live with dignity in their own community." The faces in the crowd reflected a complex mix of shame, indignation, and most importantly, understanding. As I watched Karen being escorted to a police car, still clutching her HOA rulebook, I couldn't help but wonder what this spectacular evening would mean for our once peaceful neighborhood and how many other HOAs were engaging in similar practices across the state. Chapter 4. Uncovering the Truth. The morning after the bulldozing incident revealed the full extent of Karen's reign of terror. My phone buzzed incessantly as our security camera footage went viral overnight, drawing national attention to our suburban drama. News vans lined our street, their satellite dishes competing for space in our once tranquil neighborhood sky. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. My former high school classmate, now a human rights lawyer, who shared startling revelations about Karen's past HOA infractions. The files he sent painted a disturbing picture of a pattern of abuse spanning multiple neighborhoods. Karen had faced lawsuits 3 times before for similar actions, always managing to settle quietly and move on to torment a new HOA. This time, however, she had picked the wrong house on the wrong day. Sarah, true to her nature as an effective governor, transformed her anger into action. She called an emergency press conference right on our front lawn, with the shattered remains of our ramp serving as a powerful backdrop. The media frenzy reached new heights as Sarah unveiled a packet of documents detailing how Karen had violated not only federal disability laws but also breached 17 different state housing regulations. What followed was both shocking and heartwarming. Our elderly neighbors began stepping forward, one by one, to share their stories of Karen's oppression. Mrs. Chen recounted how Karen had forced her to remove her medical garden, essential for her arthritis treatment. Mr. Rodriguez produced documentation showing how Karen had fined him for installing a wheelchair lift for his veteran father. Even the quiet Baker family spoke up about being threatened with fines for their autistic son's sensory-friendly playground equipment. The neighborhood I'd known for years suddenly felt unrecognizable, but in the best possible way. People who had previously avoided eye contact were now talking openly, sharing their experiences and finding strength in numbers. Karen attempted to call an emergency HOA meeting to address what she termed baseless charges, but only her 2 remaining loyal followers from the board showed up. Meanwhile, Sarah had invited disability rights advocates to our house, and half the neighborhood attended to learn about accessible housing rights. Just when it seemed things couldn't get more intense, someone leaked Karen's HOA financial records. The revelation shocked everyone. She had been using the fines she collected to pay for her own home renovations, labeling them as board-approved community improvements. The HOA's lawyer immediately resigned, and 3 board members sent resignation emails that somehow found their way to local news outlets. Undeterred, Karen showed up at our place the next morning with a cease and desist letter, demanding we stop spreading misinformation about her. What she didn't anticipate was walking straight into a meeting between Sarah and the State Housing Commissioner, who was deeply interested in reviewing every HOA decision Karen had made in the last 5 years. The look on Karen's face as she realized her reign of terror was crumbling was almost worth all the drama. Almost. But the most satisfying development was watching our neighbors put up accessible housing advocate placards on their yards, one by one, until Karen's house stood alone without one. News helicopters captured it all, and by sunset, our story had made national headlines. That evening, as more neighbors gathered on our lawn, sharing stories and planning a new inclusive HOA, I couldn't help but wonder how one wheelchair ramp had sparked such profound change. But the night wasn't over yet. Sarah had just received some fascinating documents about the bulldozing firm's connection to Karen's private contracting business, hinting at deeper layers of corruption yet to be uncovered. Chapter 5. The community transforms. The morning after Karen's fall from power marked the beginning of a remarkable transformation in our neighborhood. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from neighbors eager to share their own HOA horror stories. Reporters clamored for interviews, but what truly caught my attention was an email from Mrs. Rodriguez. She had proof of Karen violating other laws, including fraudulent paperwork regarding her election as HOA president. Apparently, she had simply assumed the role when the previous president moved away, with no formal election or approval process. Sarah's legal team discovered that Karen had systematically ignored crucial sections of the HOA rules she claimed to enforce so zealously. We spent hours highlighting these contradictions, uncovering more evidence of her manipulative tactics. The more we investigated, our case attracted national attention when Tommy Chin, a prominent YouTube lawyer specializing in discriminatory housing laws, flew in to consult with Sarah. His video analysis of our situation garnered millions of views within hours, amplifying our message far beyond our suburban borders. Karen attempted one final desperate move, calling an emergency HOA meeting. But this time, instead of her usual audience of 2 sleepy neighbors, the community center overflowed with residents eager to speak out. Mr. Jenkins presented photos of his daughter's treehouse that Karen had forced him to dismantle. The Wilson family shared their experience with Christmas lights deemed excessively bright. When Sarah took the microphone, she didn't just talk about the ramp. She revealed her larger vision. "I've been working on legislation to protect homeowners from HOA abuse," she announced, prompting thunderous applause. The proposed Right to Home Happiness Act would establish clear guidelines for HOA operations and provide legal recourse for residents facing discrimination. As she spoke, Karen's lawyer quietly excused himself. The final blow came when our security footage proved she had falsified documents to authorize the bulldozing. 2 days later, we watched Karen pack up her prized row bushes, the ones she had pressured everyone else to copy, and leave the neighborhood. The new HOA board wasted no time implementing positive changes. They transformed the old infractions office into a community help center, replacing fines with welcome baskets for new neighbors. Their initiative to assist elderly residents with home repairs became wildly popular, demonstrating how community organizations should function. Our ramp was rebuilt, but this time with enhancements suggested by local artists. The new design featured beautiful floral decorations and LED lighting that created a gentle glow at night. Neighbors' children declared it the coolest feature on our street, often stopping to admire the artwork. Last week's neighborhood barbecue in our backyard served as a powerful symbol of our community's evolution. Where Karen once stood shouting about grass height rules, families now gathered freely, sharing food and laughter. The impact extended far beyond our immediate neighborhood. The bulldozing company, seeking redemption, launched a program offering free ramp installations to disabled residents statewide. Their CEO personally apologized to Sarah and established a scholarship fund for students studying disability rights law. Perhaps most surprising was my promotion to manage the state's new homeowner protection office. My first assignment involved teaching other neighborhoods how to transform their HOAs from bullies into supportive community organizations. Sarah's words continue to resonate. We're just getting started. Looking back at how much has changed in a single year, I believe her completely. Our story has been included in school textbooks as a case study in challenging unjust rules. But the true victory lies in everyday moments. Mrs. Rodriguez's growing army of garden gnomes, toddlers playing freely on front lawns without fear of violation notices. Karen's former house sold last week to a family with 3 children, 2 dogs, and a grandmother who uses a wheelchair. Instead of complaints, 5 neighbors showed up to help them unpack and install their new ramp. This journey taught us that sometimes the worst moments lead to the most meaningful changes. We didn't just reform an HOA. We redefined what it means to be neighbors. Through adversity, our community discovered its true strength: the power of unity, empathy, and collective action. The wheelchair ramp that started it all stands as a testament to these values, glowing softly in the evening light, reminding us that progress often begins with a single step toward justice. Chapter 6. Lessons Learned and New Beginnings. Reflecting on our journey, several key lessons emerge that extend far beyond our suburban neighborhood. First and foremost, the importance of documentation cannot be overstated. Every piece of paper, every interaction, every official communication becomes crucial when facing institutional abuse. Our meticulous record-keeping provided the foundation for accountability and ultimately contributed to systemic change. This lesson applies universally. Whether dealing with local authorities, workplace management, or any form of organized governance, maintaining thorough documentation creates a trail of truth that can withstand manipulation and misinformation. Secondly, the power of community organizing proved transformative. What began as isolated incidents of HOA overreach blossomed into a united movement when neighbors shared their stories and recognized common patterns of abuse. The courage of individuals like Mrs. Chen, Mr. Rodriguez, and the Baker family demonstrated how personal vulnerability can become collective strength. Their willingness to speak out despite potential repercussions created a ripple effect that empowered others to join the cause. This underscores the critical role of solidarity in achieving social change. When people unite around shared values and experiences, they can challenge even the most entrenched systems of power. The incident also highlighted the necessity of legal expertise in navigating complex situations. Tommy Chin's involvement not only amplified our message but provided professional guidance through intricate legal frameworks. His analysis of discriminatory housing practices helped translate our personal struggles into broader policy discussions. This emphasizes the importance of seeking specialized knowledge when confronting institutional challenges. Experts can bridge the gap between personal experience and systemic reform. Perhaps most significantly, our experience demonstrated the power of leadership rooted in authenticity and purpose. Sarah's approach to governance, both as governor and as a community member, exemplified how authority should serve rather than dominate. Her ability to channel personal frustration into constructive action inspired others to follow suit. The Right to Home Happiness Act stands as a testament to how individual experiences can inform meaningful legislative change, creating protections that benefit entire communities. Looking ahead, the establishment of the state's Homeowner Protection Office represents a significant step toward preventing similar abuses elsewhere. My role in educating other neighborhoods about transforming their HOAs from authoritarian bodies into supportive community organizations continues this legacy of positive change. The scholarship fund initiated by the Bulldozing Company ensures that future generations will have resources to advocate for disability rights, creating a cycle of empowerment that extends beyond our immediate circumstances. Ultimately, our story serves as a powerful reminder that meaningful change often emerges from seemingly small conflicts. The wheelchair ramp that sparked this transformation continues to stand as a symbol of perseverance and progress. Its artistic enhancements, created by local talent, represent how functional necessities can become beautiful expressions of community values. The evening glow of its LED lights reminds us that darkness can give way to illumination, both literally and metaphorically. As I watch new families move into Karen's former home, complete with their own wheelchair ramp, I realize that true community spirit manifests in mutual support and understanding. The spontaneous assistance offered during their move-in demonstrates how far we've come from the days of rigid enforcement and arbitrary rules. Our neighborhood has evolved into a living example of how diverse needs and perspectives can coexist harmoniously when guided by principles of inclusion and respect. The journey hasn't ended. It has merely transformed into a new chapter of growth and learning. Each garden gnome added to Mrs. Rodriguez's collection, every child's laughter echoing from front yards, and each new accessible modification represents another step forward in building a community that values human dignity above arbitrary standards. These everyday moments, more than any headline or legislation, embody the lasting impact of standing up against injustice. They prove that when people unite around shared values of fairness and compassion, they can create environments where everyone can thrive. Epilogue. A year of transformation. 12 months have passed since that fateful morning when our quiet suburban street became ground zero for a nationwide conversation about homeowners' rights and accessibility. The changes in our neighborhood are both visible and profound. Where once stood Karen's meticulously manicured lawn now grows a vibrant community garden, tended by residents of all ages and abilities. The former HOA office, once feared for its punitive notices, now houses a bustling community center offering everything from art classes to accessibility workshops. Local schools regularly bring students to learn about inclusive design and community activism firsthand. The impact has rippled far beyond our immediate neighborhood. The Right to Home Happiness Act has been adopted as model legislation by several states, establishing clear guidelines for HOA operations and providing robust protections against discriminatory practices. The Scholarship Fund for Disability Rights Law has grown exponentially, supported by contributions from major corporations and legal organizations nationwide. Perhaps most remarkably, the Bulldozing Company's free ramp installation program has expanded into a comprehensive accessibility initiative, partnering with architects and designers to create innovative solutions for homes across the state. Social media continues to play a crucial role in our ongoing advocacy. The hashtag ramp revolution trends regularly, connecting homeowners facing similar challenges with resources and support networks. Online forums dedicated to fair housing practices have flourished, creating virtual communities that mirror the solidarity we've built locally. Educational institutions have incorporated our story into various curricula, from elementary school civics lessons to university-level urban planning courses. Personally, my role at the Homeowner Protection Office has evolved into a platform for systemic change. We've developed certification programs for HOA leaders, emphasizing ethical governance and inclusive practices. Regular town halls, both virtual and in person, facilitate open dialogue between residents and community organizations. The network of accessible housing advocates has grown into a national coalition, pushing for progressive housing policies at every level of government. Looking at our neighborhood today, It's difficult to imagine the atmosphere of fear and division that once dominated. Children race their bikes along streets where uniformity once reigned supreme, while diverse architectural modifications showcase individual expression alongside practical accessibility. The annual Accessibility Awareness Day celebration draws visitors from across the country, featuring demonstrations of adaptive technologies and panel discussions on inclusive community design. Most importantly, the spirit of cooperation and mutual support continues to flourish. Neighbors routinely check in on one another, volunteering time and resources to ensure everyone can participate fully in community life. The initial act of defiance against Karen's authoritarianism has blossomed into a culture of care and collaboration, proving that sometimes the greatest transformations arise from the smallest acts of resistance. Our street, once divided by rigid rules and fear, now stands as a testament to the power of collective action and the enduring value of community-driven change.